Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Robbins, and welcome to Life, Death, and the Space Between podcast. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and medium, and here we explore life, death, consciousness, and what it all means. Today, we're going to dig a little deeper into an episode I did back in October with Carole J. Obley. Carole is the author of Embracing the Ties That Bind, I'm Still With You, and soul-to-soul connections. She has communicated with souls who have crossed into the spirit world through thousands of private and group sessions. She has earned a reputation in her geographical area as the real deal among psychic mediums. She travels nationally to speak and teach workshops, as well as maintaining a practice in mediumship based near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Her newest book, Wisdom from the Spirit World, Life Teachings on Love, Forgiveness, Purpose, and Finding Peace, is out now. Welcome back, Carole. Almost done with the public service announcements about my upcoming program, at least for a little while. If you want more information, I did do a podcast on it last week. It's called Live Your Life Backwards, the program. If you want more information or want to get on my wait list, please do so at dramyrobbins.com, and you can find my wait list under courses. Also, if you have not subscribed to my newsletter yet, you can do that at dramyrobbins.com. You can follow me on Instagram at Dr. Amy Robbins, and if you have any ghost stories to share, please do so at dramyrobbins@gmail.com. Don't forget to subscribe to my podcast and rate and review. You can also catch me on YouTube now as well if you would like to watch the podcast while you listen.
Thank you.
So
it's good to be back.
Yes, so I'm so excited to have you back for a few reasons. One, I know several listeners reached out after our last interview and then reached out to me after having readings with you and were really just floored by their experience. And so one of the I invite a lot of people on this show. I don't necessarily have readings with them before to attest to the sort of work that they do, but I think that what came through pretty clearly probably in our interview together was how much integrity is important for you in this work. So I'm excited to have you back on today, specifically to talk about Akashic Records, and we're going to also do a little mini Akashic reading so people can understand what this is really about.
Okay, thank you.
So I want to sort of start. We covered this a little bit in our last interview, but can you talk to us about what the Akashic Records or Akashic files are, how you access them, what they look like to you? Let's just start there.
Yeah, the Akashic Records or files in Wisdom from the Spirit World, I refer to them as files, and they're the same thing. They are energetic imprints of everything that a soul has done from the beginning of time. So whenever that was, we don't know when that was. And they travel with the soul through multiple incarnations, and in between those incarnations also. So in the spirit world, there is still the Akashic record that's attached to the vibration, the energy of the soul, which we know is eternal. Certainly my work as a medium has shown and demonstrated that there is continuity of consciousness. I always tell people I don't believe in life after death. I know it. I've seen it and directly experienced it. The Akashic Records are they are energetic in nature, and what they really are imprints of what that soul has left in time and space, on time and space. So this concept of personal responsibility, which, by the way, is a natural law, meaning an immutable, eternal, divine law, is always in effect. Therefore, whatever we put out, and this is also called the law of karma, we receive, and there is always personal responsibility. And so the records are everything that a soul has produced, thought in minute detail from the beginning of time. And we're constantly adding to our records. You and I sitting here recording this podcast, we are adding this to our Akashic file. So
how does one sort of come to, how did these come to be? Like, when was the first time it was documented or known that, mediums or spiritual leaders are picking up on this information? Like, how did this first happen?
Well, I don't know the answer to that. I do know one of the things that I teach, and I have a webinar coming up on the Akashic Records where I tell people that Edgar Cayce, the famous American psychic who did his readings in the 1920s and 1930s, accessed these files. Now, that's a relatively recent example in the scope of human history. But the files have always existed because we are essentially energy that's encased in this physical body. So we're always transmitting energy no matter what we're doing. Cayce would access the files of an individual to gain information related to what the sitter or the client wanted to know. And that includes mental imbalances, emotional imbalances, also on the positive side, skills, qualities, predispositions, and also physical illness. And sometimes Cayce was a healer, essentially, and he would prescribe these remedies, which the Edgar Cayce Foundation, which is in Virginia Beach, Virginia, still use today and still teach. And based on what Cayce found in the files or the records of the individual he was reading for, he was able to then see where the imbalance came in the spiritual body, which is the highest vibratory-wise body, and it's kind of a trickle down. We have the emotional, mental bodies, and then the physical being the densest or lowest in vibration. Cayce was able to read the records of that soul and see where the imbalance might have come from. A lot of times it's from a thought imbalance, sort of incorrect type of thinking that's out of alignment with the higher self or the soul self. And that creates imbalance eventually in the body. It can. So everything is interconnected, and one body affects the other. And I think modern medicine is finally starting to realize that you really can't separate the emotions and thoughts from what's going on in the body.
So how do you differentiate between a medium reading and an Akashic Files reading? Like, how do you know that the information is coming through a different channel, or do you tap it differently?
Yeah, because with evidential mediumship, and that's what I specialize in, meaning giving facts, connecting, allowing people from the spirit world that are related to the client to connect to me. I can't make anybody communicate. They connect to me. That involves communication with that soul. And in the course of the reading, there's a lot of facts given about that person's life, memories, evidence that the sitter can substantiate. The Akashic file reading is different. Many times I use the client's astrological natal chart, including the birth time, place, and date. And the reason that's important is because the moment that that soul entered into physical incarnation, the planets were in certain signs, which flavor them, and they were in certain relationships or aspects, as it's called in astrology, with one another. And so there's influences or predispositions when the soul is born with the planets in those particular placements, whatever those might be. I don't need the chart. It's another tool. I started getting many, many years ago, probably 25 years ago. I've been doing this work for going on 3 decades. I started spontaneously receiving information when I was doing regular psychic type readings for people. There would be scenes or images that appeared above the client's right shoulder. And so at first I was a little bit unsure about that. And then when I gained a little bit more self-confidence, I would share that with the client. And 9 times out of 10, they would resonate with it. They would validate it and say, that's funny. I've always felt this. I've always struggled with that particular issue. I feel as though I've had this pattern from the beginning of time of birth, that's followed me through. And interestingly, those patterns, emotionally or mentally, can also come down the family line. So they're inherited. They can be karmic inherited patterns that, the person has, in my books, I call them blueprints, issues, challenges that the soul has signed up for to experience in order to evolve spiritually.
Yeah, and I guess psychologically we would call that intergenerational trauma. And so you heal. So the question is, do you heal these spiritual wounds? Are they wounds? Like these spiritual lessons, psychologically, spiritually, both?
Yeah, it's multi-pronged. There's something about bringing something into conscious awareness. And I did forget to mention that the records are stored in the individual subconscious.
I was going to ask.
Yes.
This happened to us last time too.
I know.
I feel like we did a lot of this like back and forth, like
I'm so used to being in attunement with whoever's I'm connected with. Sometimes that happens even in interviews. So the records are stored. You can access them by past life regression, but they're in the subconscious. Sometimes even in the dream state, people will have what I call bleed-throughs of prior incarnations. Some of them may be quite powerful in that there's a lot of emotion involved. It could be fear. It could be deep sorrow. It could be a number of emotions. It could be joy or happiness, confusion, any of those things. Because, of course, when we're sleeping, the subconscious is predominant. And so now a light hypnosis or regression, there's some people who cannot go into that. I can go into that very easily, but I actually was certified in doing regressions. I haven't done them in a long time. I basically do the Akashic record reading, which the client is passive in that they're receiving the information. In a regression, they're actually part of the process and they're experiencing that. So through the subconscious, there's something about when these come into the conscious mind of sort of a recognition of them. And once
familiarity kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, sort of a vague, I know even, my own life, I've had these vague, um, very nebulous sorts of recollections of certain things that actually created a lot of anxiety for me, way beyond what the situation would normally present. And I was having this kind of subconscious reaction to certain situations, certain people. And I really had done a lot of exploration of that, as well as traditional psychotherapy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a firm believer in whatever is going to help you heal. This is just another tool in the toolbox,
Mm-hmm.
as is mediumship.
Mm-hmm.
So, mindful meditation, psychotherapy, even medications, can help us when necessary.
Yeah. And oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the value of this is to bring it into the conscious mind so that it can be fully recognized and addressed. And the person then can begin to see that sometimes these are called faulty thoughts. Why are they faulty? Well, for one thing, they're based in the past, which no longer exists, but can still leave this imprint, particularly if it's a very strong emotional imprint.
Mm-hmm.
Those might take the soul many lifetimes to really, balance and heal. I'm a firm believer that when we do things energetically, that it's usually very quick to get into the root of things and to really go down into the core. As you probably know, spiritual growth and removing different thoughts we have and faulty thoughts and painful thoughts, it's much like unraveling layers. And so sometimes you can go into the Akashic and you see one lifetime, but there's others in which the same theme has played out. So there's sort of, they're kind of corollaries to the core theme of what was going on with that individual.
And that's how you work to clear out the karma. Is that accurate? Like that once you figure out sort of what your core lesson might be, then you can work through, like if you are constantly in bad relationships, then there is probably some karma to work through as it relates to that. And so if you can recognize that this is a pattern for you, then you can work through that so you don't continue to repeat it in other lifetimes, right?
Yeah, the value of it is to really bring it up in conscious awareness, because we can't really, the first step in healing, any type of healing, is an acknowledgement, a recognition of the issue.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't have that vital first step, we can't heal anything. So bringing it up into conscious awareness instead of unconsciously repeating the pattern. And when I say unconsciously, kind of sleepwalking and just, going through the motions. There's something magical that happens once we bring this up. And I don't mean that to sound, like instantaneously you're going to heal, but there are certain things you can do. When I do readings for people with the Akashic, I will then, and my spirit guides, those souls who help me with the work that I'm doing, will often impress me with what's going to be helpful for that individual. So it could be working with affirmations. Certainly someone like the late Louise Hay from Hay House, who was a very powerful, positive individual. She really worked a lot with affirmations. It could be working with those sorts of things. It could be journaling. It could be simply having the conscious knowledge now that faulty thought is not true. It's not really true. It's not serving you. And the recognition of that can oftentimes lead to release as well.
Gotcha. So, one last question before we sort of dive in here. When you said that the imprints also follow you between lives, what does this look like when you're on the other side? How did these experiences play out when you're a soul, when you're not when you're disembodied, I guess?
Well, one of the first things, and I've written about this in my books, and there are many other mediums and people who have written about this, it's the life review. So when we leave the physical body, which all of us are going to do at some point, and we go back into our pure form of being pure energy or spirit, we get what is called a life review. Now, there are different accounts of these, and I'm constantly astonished and fascinated with the different accounts that I've read. So in that life review, what we see is everything from the beginning, from birth, in great detail, the most minute instances in our life. We see the choices that we made, and importantly, the implications of those choices. Also, another important facet of that is how what we did, the choices that we made, contributed to our own evolution or put us back, and how we affected others, how others felt. And you can't really, in that pure form, there's no deception, there's no dishonesty. You really, each soul takes this honest, unfiltered look at the previous lifetime. And then what happens is we consult with advisors, our spirit guides. And okay, with this particular lesson that you set up in your blueprint, which is part of the Akashic Record, how do you think you did? Did you earn a C? Did you earn a B, an A? Did you fail it? And so then there's no lying. I mean, I could use more practice on that. So that kind of then is an intent then that the soul can work on in the spirit world to balance and heal unfinished business or karma, or for a future incarnation. So that's essentially, from my experience, what I've seen. And I will tell you that in many mediumship readings, there are souls who come through and they talk about what they're doing in the spirit world. And many times it's a continuation of the work that they were doing here. For example, somebody who is a psychotherapist. I have seen and personally communicated with souls who have undergone further training in the spirit world to act as sort of a therapist or a healer in the spirit world. And, we don't just sit on the clouds and play harps with the angels. We're continually growing and evolving.
I don't get to just lay on the beach over there. That's what I'm kind of hoping for.
Well, you can do that. I have seen many souls who are engaged in leisure time, for example, gardening, fishing, hiking, because the spirit world is very, very beautiful.
But how are we doing that if we're not in a physical body? What does that look like?
Through thought. Everything is through thought. And interestingly, I'm glad you asked this, because one of the first things that a newly crossed spirit has to learn to do is how to move without using physical legs. And it's through thought. And by focusing on, I want to say that, I pass over before my husband. I want to be back with my husband, and Zoom, instantly I'm there. I mean, in spirit. I want to be over in this part of the spirit world. When I think about that, I can be there. So it's instantaneous, because the spirit world is vibrating at a much higher velocity than the physical plane. This is the densest plane that there is. The energy here is moving very slowly compared to the spirit world. So there's a big difference in how we're able to navigate between the two planes of consciousness.
Well, and that's why there sort of has to be, I guess, if you believe that this is in fact the way it is, there has to be the belief that the consciousness does not reside within the brain, right? It resides outside the brain.
Yeah, and interestingly, there's some scientific studies that I've seen and just scrolling through Facebook and social media that, there is recognition now that may not be true. The brain is simply, I always look at the physical brain as kind of a step-down unit. We incarnate. And, we have, of course, there's all of the stuff going on in the physical brain and the rational aspect of that, the left brain functioning. But there's also the part of consciousness that is not limited to the brain. And, the spiritual part of us, that part that is eternal, that is never destroyed, that will leave here when the physical vehicle dies. And so that never changes. That is the eternal part of us. This is temporary.
I keep having more questions every time I think we're going to go into the reading portion. Is there an Akashic Records for the collective, like for what we're going through right now? Like, what is the sort of collective recordings on this?
Yes, and that's an excellent question. And yes, there is a collective Akashic record of humanity.
Can't be looking very good right now.
Well, interestingly, many years ago, I read an account that said, in fact, Edgar Cayce, I believe in his channeling, said this, that in the Sphinx in Egypt, that the entire journey of humankind is recorded in, I think it's the left paw of the Sphinx. I have no idea if that's real, if that's legitimate. I mean, they're still, uncovering things in Egypt. It's such an ancient civilization. But certainly some of the Egyptians were extremely advanced. There was a lot going on in those civilizations. I don't know that we're ever going to truly know the full extent of it. But it doesn't matter if it's located here physically. There does exist a collective Akashic record of the entire, body of humankind. Absolutely.
And so would it be balanced then? Because you assume that it all sort of has to be balanced out, like good versus bad, people here versus people there on the other side.
Yeah, well, that's why it's so important. What is each individual putting out into the collective consciousness? So, it isn't that, people think, well, what can I do? What am I contributing? Every single thought that you have goes into the collective consciousness, whether that's positive, negative. Why? Because it's energy. Thought is energy. And I tell people all the time, thought is like electricity. You can't see it. You can't hold it in your hand, but it's extremely potent and powerful. So every single, thought that we're doing in some way is adding to the collective thought forms in humanity.
Got it. I'm sure I'll have more questions as we go. We are going to do the Akashic Records reading next week. So thank you so much, Carole, for taking the time today to talk with us about Akashic Records. And everybody stay tuned for next week's episode where you will hear Carole's Akashic reading with me. So stay tuned for that. And if you would like to contact Carole, you can get all the information about her and her readings in my show notes. Like what you heard today and want to hear more? Wondering what comes next and what it all means? Head over to Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or anywhere you get your podcasts and hit subscribe. Also, if you could take a minute to rate and review my podcast, I would really appreciate it. Stay tuned as we continue to explore life, death, and the space between.